Welcome to today's deep dive. We're going to be looking at a book called The Adam and Eve Story
Okay.
by Chan Thomas, and it was published back in 1965. And it really makes you think differently about history and maybe even the future.
Yeah, it really does. I mean, Thomas combines geology and ancient myths,
Oh, wow.
and even the Bible to argue that Earth has experienced these cataclysmic cycles.
Cataclysmic cycle.
Yeah, basically he thinks that every few thousand years, massive shifts in the Earth's crust cause these huge events.
Huge events like what?
Well, floods, earthquakes, even changes to the planet's whole geography.
Wow, so he's saying these events are like, they've really shaped civilization.
Yeah, exactly. And to understand his argument, you need to start with how he views the Earth.
Okay.
He has this diagram that shows the molten layers beneath the surface, and he thinks shifts in those layers cause the crust to move.
But I'm looking at the diagram now. It shows the Earth's core, the mantle, and the crust.
Yeah.
But how does he explain what makes those molten layers shift?
Well, he has a kind of interesting theory about that.
Okay.
He suggests that ice buildup at the poles,
Ice buildup?
yeah, at the poles, could disrupt the Earth's balance, both magnetically and electrically, and eventually lead to those massive shifts.
So like a giant ice cube making the Earth wobble. I can see how that could cause some instability.
Yeah.
But does he have any evidence to back up this theory?
He does. He has several examples. One is the Borosiovka mammoth found frozen in Siberia.
Oh, right. I remember that. Wasn't it found with food still in its mouth?
Yeah, buttercups, actually, which suggests it died and was frozen super quickly,
Wow.
like almost instantly.
To a rapid event.
Right. He argues this points to a sudden climate shift, maybe even a crustal displacement.
That's a crazy image, a mammoth just grazing 1 minute and then flash frozen the next.
Yeah, it makes you wonder what else is out there.
What other evidence did he find?
Well, another example is the Laurentide ice sheet, which used to cover a big chunk of North America.
Yeah.
He thinks its rapid melting and disappearance could have been triggered by a sudden shift in the Earth's crust.
Okay, so we've got the mammoth and the vanishing ice sheet. Anything else?
Yeah, he also mentions the Piri Reis map.
Okay.
That 16th century map that some think shows Antarctica before it was officially discovered.
I've heard of that.
And what's even more interesting is that it shows Antarctica without its ice cap,
What?
suggesting it was charted when it was ice-free.
A map of Antarctica without ice? Wow. If that's true, it would really support the idea of a very different Earth in the past.
Right.
But let's be honest, a lot of people would probably think these theories are pretty out there. Does he address that?
He does. He acknowledges that his ideas aren't widely accepted by, the mainstream scientific community, but he argues that he's working with facts.
Okay.
He really wants readers to look at the evidence and come to their own conclusions.
So he's not afraid of a little controversy. I like that. But how does the Adam and Eve story fit into all of this? The title of the book seems pretty straightforward, but we've been talking about mammoths and ice sheets.
Right, that's where it gets really interesting. Thomas believes that the biblical story of Adam and Eve is actually a symbolic retelling of an ancient cataclysm.
So he's not talking about Adam and Eve literally.
No, he sees it as a metaphor for a real event.
Interesting.
He looks at all these different interpretations of the Adam and Eve story, and he thinks the original version might come from a prehistoric civilization called the Naga.
The Naga, who are they?
Thomas believes they had this language that came before ancient Mayan, and they used symbols or glyphs to communicate. And he suggests that a priest named Ezra, who was rewriting Hebrew history, reconstructed Genesis from those Naga sources.
Okay.
And in doing so, he might have misinterpreted the symbolism.
Oh, so he's saying there's this hidden message in the Adam and Eve story.
Exactly. And he goes through his interpretation of Genesis really carefully, like chapters 1, 2, and 3, and draws these parallels between the imagery and the physical events he's describing.
Interesting.
Like he sees the verses about floods and darkness covering the earth.
Oh, okay.
And the creation of the sky as symbolic descriptions of this cataclysmic event and what happened afterwards.
Okay, I'm starting to see how he's connecting things. But wouldn't that require a pretty big change in how we think about the Bible?
Yeah, it would. And that's exactly what Thomas is proposing.
Wow.
He thinks that if we understand what these symbols really mean, we can see Genesis as both a record of these cyclical catastrophes and a warning.
A warning?
Right. Yeah, for the future.
That's a pretty big claim. But before we get too deep into Genesis, I want to go back to the Naga for a second. He doesn't say much about them here. Where can we learn more about them?
That's a great question. He does have a list of suggested readings, and I think some of those might shed some light on the Naga and their connection to this ancient cataclysm.
Perfect. Because before we start reinterpreting the Bible, I'd like to get a better sense of who they were and where they fit into all of this. Okay, so we're going through Chan Thomas's suggested reading to learn more about the Naga and maybe find some evidence for these cataclysmic cycles. Where should we start?
Well, one book that I think addresses this timeline pretty directly is The Lost Americans by Frank C. Hibben. It focuses on that extinction event that wiped out a lot of the large animals in North America about 11,000 years ago.
Right around when Thomas places his Adam and Eve cataclysm.
Mm.
Is Hibben on the same page? Like, is he arguing for crust displacement as the cause?
Not specifically, but his research does paint this kind of chilling picture of like sudden widespread death across like tons of species, mammoths, bison, giant sloths. Hibben doesn't pinpoint a single cause, but he does talk about massive floods, volcanic eruptions, rapid climate change, all factors that could have contributed to such a massive extinction event.
So while he might not be connecting it to crust displacement directly, the timing and the scale of the destruction do seem to line up with Thomas's theory.
Exactly. It's like two different perspectives converging on the same point in history.
Right, like everyone's looking at pieces of the same puzzle, but maybe not putting them together in the same way.
Yeah. And Hibben, he uses some pretty vivid language to describe his findings, too.
Yeah.
You know, he talks about remains torn and twisted as though by a cosmic hand in a godly rage.
Wow.
It really makes you wonder if other researchers have found similar evidence, but just haven't connected it to these cyclical cataclysms.
Right, it's like seeing a pattern, but not knowing what the pattern means.
Yeah.
So Hibben adds another layer of intrigue to this time frame, around 11,000 years ago. What else is on the list?
Another one that caught my eye, and it goes even further in terms of possible causes, is Worlds in Collision by Manuel Velikovsky. This one's, it's a little controversial. It explores the possibility of catastrophic encounters between Earth and other celestial bodies.
Well, I've heard of that one. Didn't Velikovsky propose that, like, the parting of the Red Sea was caused by a near collision with a planet or something?
That's right. He suggests that events described in ancient myths and religious texts, like the plagues of Egypt, could be explained by near collisions with Venus and Mars. He even argues that these encounters could have shifted the Earth's axis and, triggered massive floods.
Whoa.
Talk about cataclysmic.
Yeah, and I imagine those ideas didn't exactly go over well with the scientific community when the book came out.
You're right. Velikovsky's work was met with a lot of resistance. A lot of scientists dismissed his theories as pseudoscience, but despite the pushback, his work did spark a debate about the role of catastrophism in shaping Earth's history, and that debate continues today.
So while his specific explanations might be debated, he brought the idea of sudden impactful events into the conversation.
Yeah.
It makes you think about how challenging the accepted narrative, even if it's initially rejected, can open up new avenues of exploration.
Absolutely. It highlights how important it is to consider different perspectives and not just dismiss ideas because they seem unconventional. And speaking of different perspectives, another book Thomas recommends, and this ties back to something we were talking about before, is Secret Cities of South America by Harold T. Wilkins.
I remember you mentioning ancient maps. I'm always fascinated by the idea of, hidden knowledge encoded in those artifacts.
Mm-hmm.
What does Wilkins have to say?
Well, Wilkins argues that maps like the Piri Reis map, which seems to show Antarctica centuries before it was officially discovered, suggest that ancient civilizations had a level of geographic knowledge that we just don't fully grasp yet.
So it circles back to the idea that our understanding of history might be incomplete.
Right.
And that maybe there were civilizations that existed long before the ones we currently recognize.
Exactly. He even suggests that these cataclysmic events might have wiped out entire civilizations, leaving behind just, fragments of evidence that we're only now starting to uncover. It's like we're piecing together a puzzle, but most of the pieces are missing.
Yeah. And every new discovery helps fill in a little bit more of the picture.
Yeah, sometimes revealing a past that's even more complex and fascinating than we imagined.
So we've talked about Chan Thomas's ideas,
Right.
Looked at some additional readings, and considered how all this knowledge might be connected.
Yeah.
What are some of the key takeaways from the Adam and Eve story that you think our listeners should keep in mind?
Well, I think first and foremost, it's important to remember that Thomas is presenting a hypothesis, not a proven fact.
Right.
He lays out some compelling evidence and he makes connections that are definitely thought-provoking. But ultimately, it's up to each individual to evaluate the information and form their own conclusions.
Yeah, we're not presenting this as the absolute truth,
Right.
but as a kind of a fascinating exploration of an alternative viewpoint. But even if we don't fully buy into Thomas's theory, I think it's important to acknowledge the evidence he presents, especially when it's corroborated by other researchers like Hibben. The idea that Earth has experienced these cyclical cataclysms in the past, it's a pretty big shift in perspective.
Right.
And one that deserves serious consideration.
Absolutely. It really challenges our understanding of human history and maybe even makes us realize just how fragile civilizations can be.
But it also highlights the resilience of life itself.
Oh, yeah.
To have survived multiple cataclysms and rebuilt time and again is pretty amazing. It's a testament to the power of life to adapt, evolve, overcome even the most challenging circumstances. It's both humbling and inspiring.
That's a great point. Which brings up another question. If these cataclysms are a recurring phenomenon, what can we do to prepare for the next one?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? I don't think anyone has a definitive answer. But maybe by understanding the past, exploring the evidence, considering different perspectives, we can gain some insights into what the future might hold.
And perhaps, as Thomas suggests, by embracing a more holistic view of knowledge, one that includes both scientific and mythological perspectives, we can start to piece together a more complete understanding of our world and the forces that shape it.
It's like weaving a tapestry.
Yeah.
Each thread, each piece of knowledge, each new discovery contributes to the overall pattern, even if we can't see the whole picture just yet.
Exactly. And who knows, maybe one day we'll have enough pieces to fully understand the grand design.
Well, until then, we'll just have to keep searching for those missing pieces one deep dive at a time.
Right.
And speaking of continuing the journey, I'm still really curious about the Naga. Naga Thomas mentions their language, but doesn't go too deep into their history or culture. I wonder if any of his other suggested readings offer more insights into who they were. It's really interesting how Thomas encourages us to see connections between different areas of study.
Yeah.
Blending geology, mythology, history, even biblical interpretation. It's like they're all part of the same story.
It is fascinating. He's really pushing us to break down those walls between different fields and recognize that truth can be found in the most unexpected places.
Right, like he's a detective gathering clues from all these different sources to try and solve this big mystery.
That's a great analogy. And it makes me think of another book Thomas recommends, Gods, Graves, and Scholars by C.W. Saram. It's all about the early days of archaeology, those daring explorers and groundbreaking discoveries.
Ooh, I love a good archaeological adventure.
Yeah.
How does this book fit in with what we've been talking about?
Well, Saram talks about guys like Heinrich Schliemann, who excavated Troy, and Howard Carter, who discovered King Tut's tomb. These archaeologists, they challenged the accepted knowledge of their time, kind of like Thomas is doing now.
It's amazing how our understanding of history keeps changing as we find new things that challenge old assumptions.
Yeah, and it makes you wonder what else is still out there waiting to be discovered. It's like the Earth itself is this massive library holding all these stories of lost civilizations and forgotten events.
It makes you realize that history isn't just dates and facts, but a story of human struggles, innovations, and resilience.
And as Thomas suggests, maybe even a cautionary tale.
Right, even the most advanced civilizations are vulnerable to forces beyond their control, and those patterns might repeat themselves.
It's a humbling thought, but it's also empowering in a way. It reminds us that we're all part of something much bigger than ourselves, a story that started long before us and will continue long after we're gone.
It really puts things into perspective. And it also shows how important it is to learn from the past, both the good and the bad, to help us navigate the future,
Absolutely.
So we've explored Thomas's ideas, looked at some additional readings, and thought about how all this knowledge connects. What's the one thing you hope our listeners will take away from all of this?
I think for me, it's to never stop questioning. Never stop looking for answers. The world is full of mysteries, and the pursuit of knowledge never really ends. That's a great way to put it. And remember what Chan Thomas wrote. A little bit of knowledge can be a dangerous thing, or it can be a vibrant seed giving rise to verdant forests and awakening sleeping giants.
It's up to us to decide what kind of seeds we plant and what kind of future we create. Maybe one of our listeners will be inspired by this and make some groundbreaking discovery of their own.
The possibilities are endless. Who knows what's out there waiting to be found?
Well, that's our deep dive into the Adam and Eve story by Chan Thomas. We hope you enjoyed exploring these ideas with us about geology, mythology, history, and all the mysteries of our planet.
Keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep your mind open to the wonders all around you.
Until next time, stay curious.